The inspiring Dorothea Dix. Dorothea Dix was born in 1802. She did not have an easy childhood. Her father was a very religious man, and he made Dorothea sew together religious books, while other young children were skipping or picking berries. Dorothea was stuck indoors. When Dorothea was 12, she went to live with her grandmother. Her life didn't improve much. She was required to sew, cook, and knit. If her chores were not done well, she was punished. Dix was asked about her early life when she was an adult. She said, "Poor thing, I never had any childhood." Her rough early start may be what led her to become such an amazing adult. Dorothea Dix dedicated her life to helping those who could not help themselves. Dix first started her charitable work when she was only 14 years old. She opened a one-room school for girls. Many people thought she was too young. In fact, many of the children she was teaching were only a little younger than her. But she worked very hard and turned out to be an excellent teacher. Her students loved her. After running this school for a year, Dix returned to Boston. She wanted to continue her own schooling. She was in school until she was 19. Then she started teaching again. She taught at a big school in Boston, not a one-room schoolhouse like before. However, this school was expensive for students. Not everyone could afford it, so in her spare time, she ran a much smaller school for free. These two schools kept her pretty busy. However, Dorothea still managed to write 4 books and take care of her grandmother. All this work took its toll. Dix became very sick and moved to England to recover. Before too long, she returned to America to continue her work. This time, it wasn't schools she was looking to build. Instead, she worked to help improve prisons and asylums. An asylum is a place where people with mental health issues go to get better. In Dix's time, prisons and asylums often had terrible conditions. Prisoners and patients weren't protected against bad treatment. They were often chained to walls. They were kept in cold, dark spaces. Unfortunately, few people seemed to care, except Dorothea Dix. She worked to spread the word all over the United States about how terrible these places were. She also tried to help the people in them by protecting them from mistreatment. After years of helping inmates and patients, once again, Dix was too sick to continue, so she moved back to England to rest. When she was there, she saw the same suffering that she saw in the United States. Soon enough, Dix was back trying to help those who couldn't help themselves. She even got the Pope to help her on her quest. But the United States was her home. She soon returned just before the start of the Civil War. Hating to see anyone in pain, Dix immediately signed up as a nurse for the Union Army. She worked around the clock during the war. She and her entire staff of nurses helped soldiers in any way they could. Dix died in 1887 at the age of 85, but she had a very full life. She grew from her humble childhood to a woman who helped and inspired many people around the world. John Lewis. John Lewis was a leader of the 1960s civil rights movement. Today, he is a U.S. congressman. John Lewis, an American civil rights reformer, was born and raised in Alabama. He was the son of poor farmers. He did well in school and was admitted to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. At the time, Fisk was a university for African Americans. At Fisk, Lewis was drawn into the civil rights movement. He joined with other students to stage a series of protests called sit-ins. The idea was that African American students would sit down at lunch counters in Nashville that were reserved for white people and ask to be served. If they were turned down, they would continue to sit peacefully in their seats as a form of protest against segregation. Of course, as long as they sat in the seats, the restaurant would not be able to seat other customers, so the owners would lose money. The students hoped they could persuade the owners to desegregate the lunch counters and serve all people side by side. The first big sit-in in Nashville happened in February of 1960. John Lewis and more than 100 other students walked into several restaurants, sat down, and asked to be served. The servers refused, so the students sat and waited. They sat for 2 hours. Then they got up and left. In the weeks that followed, Lewis was involved in more sit-ins, and he saw them get bigger and bigger. The second sit-in attracted more than 200 students. the third more than 300. The sit-ins also attracted spectators. Some people came just to see what was going on. Others came to get involved. There were many white people in the South who had grown up with segregation. They were upset that the students were trying to change the way things were done. Some of them began taunting the students involved in the sit-ins. A few people even attacked the students. During one sit-in, the police arrested Lewis and other protesters and hauled them off to jail. Was John Lewis ashamed? No, he was not. He actually felt excited, even joyous. He felt that it was a good thing to be thrown in jail for opposing bad laws. John Lewis protested against segregation in many other ways. In 1965, he helped lead a protest march from Selma, Alabama. He and other civil rights leaders were marching to draw attention to racist laws that kept African American people in Selma and other parts of Alabama from voting. Lewis and the others marched peacefully. They sang songs and held hands. But when they crossed the bridge as they were leaving Selma, they were attacked by white police officers with clubs. Lewis was hit on the head and passed out for a few minutes. When he woke up, he found himself in a cloud of smoke. The police had fired tear gas at the protesters. Coughing and wheezing, Lewis stood and staggered back across the bridge. All around him, the police continued to beat marchers, including some school children. The marchers were driven back across the bridge. Some of the police officers probably thought they had won a battle, but actually they had lost. There were photographers and TV cameramen nearby, and they took pictures of the attacks. Millions of Americans saw the picture on TV that night, and many were appalled. They could not believe what was happening. Many of them began to think it was time to pass new laws. In Washington, President Lyndon Johnson thought so too. He decided that the governor and the police in Alabama would not reform themselves. He would reform them. A new law was proposed. It was passed once again. American lawmakers showed themselves willing to listen to reformers. What about John Lewis? He continued protesting for a while, and then this reformer became a lawmaker himself. He was serving in Congress ever since. After reading The Inspiring Dorothea Dix and John Lewis, write an essay of several paragraphs that explains how people can show great heart in their actions and ideas. Include specific details from both texts to support your answer.